An idea for peace in Ukraine. Strategic patience. The NATO foreign ministers will meet in Brussels this week, and the biggest topic on the agenda is, of course, the war in Ukraine. One of the primary goals on the agenda appears to be keeping Ukraine viable on the battlefield in the short term and in the long term prepare for a NATO-Russian war. The tough talk from NATO is to prepare Europe and the world that war with Russia is likely and needs to be prepared for, or that NATO wants to demonstrate that it has the resolve to continue to support the war in Ukraine. The possible strategy might be to show resolve and hope that it will convince Russia and Ukraine to enter in peace talks to end this destructive war. There are many issues that Russia and Ukraine must negotiate, and negotiations will be long-lasting and tough to obtain. So perhaps all the parties are already at an impasse in the belief that peace and security is not possible, and the battlefield is the only place to resolve the issue. If an impasse is already considered overwhelming, what if NATO and the Ukraine try another tactic? Instead of escalating the war in Ukraine, NATO and Ukraine should de-escalate the war, with Ukraine switching to a defensive posture. NATO can continue to make the preparations to be outlined in the foreign ministers meeting this week and can continue to provide Ukrainians military support. The goal now will be not to recapture lost territory, but force the Russians into a long static war with occasional costly grinding offensives on their part, and be relegated to holding and occupying captured Ukraine territory. And Ukraine should adopt guerrilla tactics or small party raids to make occupied regions uncomfortable for the Russian occupiers. The intent is like Afghanistan. The Russians will be in an expensive war that is costly in manpower, equipment, and that will have Russians feeding new conscripts into the battle for years. These conscripts will return to Russia after their time in Ukraine and report on the demoralizing situation, and this can poison the morale of the next group of conscripts. The idea is to make the war as unpopular as possible to the Russian population, demoralizing and terrifying for the conscripts, and expensive for the Russian government. NATO and the U.S. must drop the war aim of replacing Vladimir Putin and just allow his mortality and age catch up with him, which will eventually make him resign. The replacement leader may be a hardliner like Putin, but they will not be personally invested in the war and could be more open to peace. The other side of the coin, Ukraine needs to hold elections and hold Zelensky to term limits, and he can exit office when his time is up, or the Ukrainian people can determine if they want to continue the war. NATO, though its preparations to be discussed this week can be escalatory in nature, can continue down this course, though not as publicly, and to continue pressure on Russia. NATO and EU leadership also need to be open to peace talks when and if Russia tires of the war, while at the same time preparing for eventuality by improving its capability that it allowed to degrade prior to the Russian invasion. Is this a perfect idea for peace? Not even close. And peace talks now would be much more desirable. The strategic patience, just as it would commit Russia to a long war, it would commit NATO to supporting the war with the demographically challenged Ukraine. NATO, Russia, and Ukraine should continue to find common ground to permanently end the war, but if that's not possible, maybe a more morale-sapping, low-intensity war is an option. Drag the war out until new leadership can come to power in either or both countries who do not have a personal investment and ego tied into the conflict, so that ending the conflict is possible. The tough issues of peace and security will still be there for Ukraine and Russia, but the transition to new leadership might make dialogue more likely where it doesn't exist now.